Welcome to Alter Health, the epigenetic code. And this is where we talk about the science of how your life shapes your genes and how your body can change when you change the conditions around it. Real stories, real science, real answers. Let's go. There is a moment in every health crisis where you stop being a patient and become a detective. Most people never reach that moment. Most people are taught not to. We are taught that the doctor knows. And we are taught that if the doctor doesn't know, then probably nobody knows. And we should just live with it. I want to tell you what happens when you refuse to live with it. I want to tell you what it is like to spend 3 months reading medical research at 2 a.m, looking for an answer that the entire medical system told you does not exist. I want to tell you what it is like to find that answer. To have a single piece of paper in your hand that contains the truth about the body of the person you love most. To know it before any doctor in the country knew it. And to wish with every cell in your body that you were wrong. This is Alter Health, the medicine nobody told you about. And I'm Dr. Nicola Schmitz. Last week I left you in a kitchen with a laptop. Today I want to take you inside what happened next. Before I get into the search itself, I want to say something about the type of person who does this, because I don't think I'm special. And I don't think you have to be a doctor to do what I did. But I do think there's a particular kind of mindset that gets activated when you watch someone you love be told repeatedly that there's nothing wrong, when you can see with your own eyes that something is wrong. That mindset is not panic. Panic actually makes you less effective. The mindset is something more like clarity with teeth. You stop caring about being polite. You stop caring about not bothering people or about whether you're being too much. You become very narrow and focused on one question. What is going on inside this body? And the thing that pushed me into that mindset was not actually any single moment. It was the cumulative weight of years of small dismissals. Years of do not worry about it. Years of the values are slightly off, but probably nothing. Just keep an eye on it. Be a smart, educated woman sitting in offices with smart, educated doctors and walking out feeling like nobody had actually looked at the human being in the room. I knew my husband. I knew his body. I had watched it for almost 30 years. When his hands trembled, I knew that was new. When he had a cramp in his calf that lasted longer than a cramp should last, I knew that was new. And the doctors didn't know any of those things because they had seen him for 10 or 15 minutes. There is a kind of knowledge that comes from loving someone that is not scientific. It doesn't show up in the chart, but it is real and it is precise. You know when something has shifted in the person you sleep next to. You know when their body is giving off a different signal than it gave off a year ago. And you know it before any test will catch it. So I trusted that knowing. And when the system told me to ignore it, I did the opposite. I sat down and started looking. Now, I want to be honest about what the search actually looked like, because I know there is a fantasy version of this story where the wife doctor dramatically figures everything out in a montage. That is not how it went. It was tedious, repetitive, and confusing. And most nights I went to bed feeling like I had wasted hours. The way I started was simple. I took the 2 blood values that had gone through the roof, and I started searching every database I could access for what those values mean when they are extremely elevated. In a man in his 40s with no heart issue, no obvious muscle injury, no infection. I read pages and pages of medical papers about what those values are, where they come from in the body, what causes them to rise, and what conditions are associated with them. Most of what I read was a dead end. Most of the conditions associated with those values had already been ruled out by the doctors we'd seen. The list of likely things had been crossed off. So I went to the unlikely things, the rare things, the things doctors do not normally consider unless they are forced to. And here's where the tremor came back into the picture. Because I was not just looking at the blood values anymore, I was looking at a constellation. 2 specific values, both very elevated, plus a slight tremor in the hands, plus occasional cramps, plus the small other things I noticed. I started searching for combinations, not just one symptom at a time, the whole pattern. And one night, around 3 a.m, I found a paper that mentioned, almost in passing, that those 2 specific values can be elevated in certain rare neuromuscular conditions. Conditions where the nerves that talk to the muscles slowly stop talking properly. The muscles do not get the signal they used to get, and over time the muscles begin to weaken, because muscles need their nerves to work. The blood values rise as a kind of distant alarm bell. That paper was a few sentences inside a much longer text, and most people would have skimmed past it. I stopped. I read it again. I read it 10 more times, and then I started pulling on that thread. The next 2 weeks were intense. I was reading about a category of diseases I had never studied in medical school in any depth. Most of them are well known, the ones everybody has heard of. I read everything I could about each one and ruled out almost all of them. They did not fit. The age was wrong, the gender pattern was wrong, the speed or the symptoms didn't all match. And then I found one, a genetic-driven condition that attacks the nerve fibers that supply the muscles. Slow, quiet, onset usually in the 30s, often missed for decades because it looks like nothing in the early stages. The blood values match, tremor matches, cramps match. The pattern of inheritance matches. Everything matches. I sat at the kitchen table in the middle of the night and I knew. Not suspected. Knew. With the kind of certainty that you do not get often in life. This was it. This was what was happening to him. And then I cried. Not loudly, just sitting there alone in the dark with the laptop open, because finding the answer was not relief. Finding the answer meant that the answer was real. And it was not a good answer. The next morning I had a different problem. I had a diagnosis in my head, but I needed it in writing. And to get it in writing, I needed a doctor to order a very specific genetic test. And here's where the medical system became its own obstacle. I called our doctor. I told him what I had found. I gave him the name of the condition, and I told him exactly which gene needed to be tested. I told him what panel of values to confirm And I told him this very calmly, the way one professional talks to another. I'm a doctor too. I know how this works. He had never heard of the disease. To his credit, he was honest about that. He said, I'm going to need to look this up. I have not seen anything like this. Are you sure? I said, yes, I am sure. Please order the test. He hesitated. He said, this is a very rare condition. Are we sure we want to spend the resources? What if it comes back negative? This is unusual. And I want you to hear what I said back, because I think a lot of women in this audience have been in some version of this conversation where you have to push past a doctor's hesitation to get a test that you already know you need. I said, I'm not asking you to agree with me. I am asking you to draw blood and send it to the lab. If I'm wrong, and we move on. If I am right, we have caught something extremely early that is normally only caught when somebody's already in a wheelchair. So please, just order the test. He ordered the test. The blood was drawn, the sample was sent to a specialized genetics laboratory. And then something happened that I will never forget. The geneticist who received the sample called our doctor, not to discuss results. The results were not in yet. He called to mock him. He said, who's ordering this test? This is not a test you order. This disease is so rare, you only find it by accident. If so, usually when somebody's already in late stages and we're doing genetic panels for other reasons. Nobody just walks in and asks for this specific gene to be tested. This is ridiculous. Whose idea was this? I don't know exactly what our doctor told him. But anyways, the geneticist apparently laughed, but the test was done. And my husband and I waited for the result. There is no good way to describe waiting for a result like that. You go through your day, you work, you make dinner, you talk to the kids, and underneath all of that, there's a clock running in your stomach. You wake up at 4 a.m. every night and you remember. You go back to sleep at 5, you wake up at 6 and start the day. Then the doctor came to my husband on his bicycle. He took his lunch break because he wanted to deliver the result personally. Positive. The exact gene I had identified. Confirmed. At a stage so early that according to the lab, it almost never gets caught at this point. The geneticist who had laughed sent a follow-up note acknowledging the diagnosis with a kind of stunned politeness. My husband and I sat with that piece of paper. The piece of paper that said, yes, this is what's happening. This is real. You were not crazy. And I felt sick. Because the answer was real, which meant the next part was real too. There is a strange grief that comes with being right about something you did not want to be right about. People don't talk about this grief much. They talk about the grief of bad news. They do not talk about the grief of the woman who fought for the truth and then has to live with the truth she fought for. My husband took it very calmly. That is who he is. He's a head person. He processes things by thinking about them. He looked at the report, read it carefully and said something practical like, okay, we know what it is now. What's the plan? I didn't have a plan. I had a name, the name of a disease. I didn't have a treatment. I didn't have a cure. I didn't have a path forward. All I had was a diagnosis at a stage so early that nobody had ever bothered to write a useful guide for what to do when you catch it this soon. And the days that followed were heavy. We told nobody for a while, not even our kids, not even our parents. We sat with it, just the two of us. We talked late into the night, more than we had talked in years. Strangely, the diagnosis did one thing the medical system hadn't been able to do for us. It made us look at each other again, properly and slowly. The way you look at someone when you have been told that the time you have together is no longer guaranteed in the way you thought. He made appointments with neurologists, with specialists who had actually seen this disease in patients before. There are very few of them because the disease is that rare. And every appointment told us essentially the same story. And the story went like this. Yes, this is the diagnosis. It's genetic. And yes, it will progress. We don't know exactly how fast in any individual person, but there's no cure. There's no treatment that stops it whatsoever. We have painkillers, but we will have to increase the dosages over time because your body will adapt. And at some point, you will likely need a wheelchair, then ventilation, and finally feeding support. The good news is that the lifespan is not significantly shortened. The bad news is, well, the rest of it. And one of them, with a kind of well-meaning brightness that I now find unbearable, told us, well, you should be glad. The insurance covers all the equipment, wheelchair, ventilation, feeding tube. You will not have to pay for any of it. I sat in that office and I felt something I had never felt before in a doctor's office. I felt that my husband wasn't treated as a human being anymore, but as a future statistic. Like we had stopped being a person and a person who loved that person, and we had become a case file with predictable steps: the wheelchair, the ventilator, the feeding tube, and the compassionate insurance coverage. Great! My husband and I drove home from that appointment in silence. He drove, I looked out the window at the mountains, and I remember thinking with a kind of cold quiet that we were not going to do this. And I didn't yet know what we were going to do instead, but we were not going to do this. So we had the diagnosis, we had the prognosis, and we had the system telling us, in essence, prepare for decline. And the truth is, in the weeks after that, I did fall into a hole. I do not want to pretend I was strong the whole time. I was not. I was a wife who had just been told that the man she loves is going to lose his body slowly over the rest of their life together. There were nights I cried so quietly that he didn't hear, and there were nights I cried where he held me and we both knew there was nothing to say. But underneath that grief, there was another thing. a small, hard kernel of something that would not let me settle. The same thing that had pushed me to find the diagnosis in the first place, that thing was saying, the answer cannot just be wait. Next week, I want to tell you about the conversation that changed everything. The conversation with my husband in the most calm and practical voice you can imagine. Told me what he wanted to happen if his body got bad enough that he could not function. The thing he said was not a complaint, it was not a cry for help, it was a clear, almost casual statement. And it was the worst thing he could have said to me. And it was, in retrospect, the moment that lit a fire in me that has not gone out since. It was the beginning of the search for the answer the doctors said did not exist. If this episode hit you somewhere, if you have been the person fighting for tests, fighting for answers to be taken seriously, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. There's a free guide in the show notes that walks you through how to advocate yourself in medical appointments without losing your mind. Thank you for being here. I'll see you next Tuesday, because health is a choice.